the audience is ready, at least partly. Somebody might be missing, but we don't care about that because we have to start now. So we have in this session we have 3 presentations about exhibitions, and the general idea is that we have 20 minutes for presentation and maybe something like 10 minutes for questions and answers. So the first presentation is by Patrick and Niklas with the title so you want to make a game exhibition, an ideation tool for exhibiting digital games, please.
So, does it work? Oh, excellent. Thank you, Jaakko. We are going to introduce ourselves very quickly. I'm Patrick Prax. Most of you have probably already seen me in some way, shape, or form. From Uppsala University, the game design department. And
my name is Niklas Nylund. I work at the Finnish Museum of Games as a researcher/curator, but I'm also working on a PhD at the Center of Excellence in Game Culture Studies at Tampere University.
Thank you. So for this paper, this was the outcome of us basically putting our heads together when Niklas was visiting us in Gotland, trying to think about how we can make the sort of theoretical thoughts that we had around games and exhibition useful for a more practical purpose. So we started out with this idea that we have sort of heard in some ways already today, and probably will hear more about, that there's a fairly still a focus on game exhibition on material, exhibitions of artifacts that show technology in some way, shape, or form. Then there's maybe something that I'm starting to think about as a second wave of a game exhibition that is looking at games as playable games as the sort of gold standard for exhibiting games. We should be able to play them. We should maybe be even able to play them as some sort of original, with this focus of the original experience that we have been hearing echoing throughout this room already several times today. And then, as a sort of maybe third wave, the next step, the question of how can we include the context around this, these games, how they are made, how they are played, what the world was like at that point. So here, for example, we have this very interesting development towards period rooms, some of which you can check out in the museum upstairs. If you haven't done that yet, I totally recommend them because they are kind of a little bit of a time travel capsule. And here we still have the playable game in its context, so to get somebody into the mind space of, hey, what was that like, and maybe get closer to some sort of original. But of course there's also the idea that there should be some sort of context around that should be visible. In the case of the period room, that's quite often still centered on the player and the play and what it was like to interact with the game. But then also from the museum upstairs we have different perspectives on games as something that's maybe irrelevant and interesting, as maybe something that has to do with politics, maybe that's something that has to do with representation, that has to do with how indigenous cultures in this case are represented, or how we think about the nation state, things that become much clearer and come really to the forefront, for example, when we look at game exhibitions of games that soldiers have made in the trenches to make sense of the broader war strategy and sort of cope with their own suffering. So these kind of very interesting cases, some of which you can take a look at in the Finnish National Museum, National Library.
The National Library of Finland has quite an extensive collection of board games. There's an exhibition on right now in Helsinki at the National Library. It's free. It's sort of recommended, or I would recommend that. They have historical board games, but also home computing stuff from the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting mix, and also some images provided from or photos of play mainly from our collections from the Finnish Museum of Games.
Yes. So the idea is that there is this shift in focus now. And we have also already been talking about what happens to homegrown, what happens to modding, what happens to all these sort of various different ways of participating in making games. Right here I'm showing the safe for work versions of moddings of Skyrim. There's a whole lot of other dimensions that there's an excellent talk it was an excellent talk at Vigra at the Games and Transgression project so that from the Norwegian project in Games and Transgression, that is super interesting. So all of these kinds of games culture and games heritage that are also there. Many of them we are maybe not showing in exhibitions as much as we should, or maybe as we would want to. So the idea really that's standing behind this effort of ours is that games are very different from each other, that they have like really vastly different. They have different play styles. Some of them are competitive, collaborative. The subcultures are completely different. How they are made is completely different, right? My reference is here to just things that I would like to see and think are sort of fascinating about games is we have, and all of these things are games. We have political movement that was sort of the reactionary, racist and misogynist proving ground for the election of Donald Trump in the United States. We have esports celebrities and the best gamer of the world, who's right now is still holding the first place in several fighting game championships, who also is, and proudly so, an African American gay furry. That is freaking amazing to me. Who's tweeting that after winning a competition? I am the best gamer in the world, and I'm an African American gay furry. So deal with that. So this kind of like beautiful, like a piece of thing of beauty. We have stuff like, hey, what happened with Pokemon Go? All of a sudden, huge phenomenon. Everybody's playing this game with Japanese creatures that we catch and forced to fight against each other, playing outside. And there's still some people doing that in Visby. You can see them going around in their little group. So that's super different. And as the last, sort of one of my favorites from the Copenhagen Games Collective, Le Petit Mort, a game that finally puts female pleasure on the agenda or at the center of attention. So all of these kind of things are something that we would like to see more, but all of these kind of things are also massively different in what kind of needs they have in terms of being exhibited and being experienced and being understood and how we should think about them. So for us, the next step would be, or one potential next step would be to make an ideation tool that would help people who are planning to make game exhibitions think about these sort of differences between games when they are planning to make an exhibition, promote reflection, and offer practical starting points to handle this complexity, and maybe could also be useful in reviewing and looking at existing exhibitions to see what kind of things they're doing right now and where they could change. So we have been trying to formulate something like that, and so far it is taking the shape of a table where we look at where we talk about different modes of presentation that we, for example, talk about here, the playable game. We describe that mode. We talk about what kind of affordances a game should have in order to be able to exhibit that mode, which games, with which goals for a museum this mode of exhibition meets, and where we have found it. I'm just showing this to you right now so that you have an idea where we're going when we take a little bit closer look at these individual parts of that.
So, yeah, looking at this from a curatorial stance, from a museum perspective, it's kind of clear that games are many different things, and we heard that today already many times. Games can be collected, but also exhibited in very different ways. And taking that as a starting point, the ideation tool kind of takes this and goes forward, and it sort of helps us come up with ideas concerning exhibitions, but also it can work as a form of theory building of actually understanding what happens in exhibitions when we're doing them. And very important point for us is to understand that there's no natural way to present games. We have talked a lot about playable games, but I would argue that we can very well do without playable games. There's lots of exhibitions that don't have playable games, or we could focus more on the play, the memories of play of people who have played those games instead of the actual playing of the game in the exhibition. So, and from this follows also sort of looking at this from a museum studies perspective, that when we decide what to put on display and how to put it on display, these are actually always ideological choices that actually construct what we understand as game heritage.
Thank you, Niklas. Absolutely. So this very critical point that we have about maybe this is something that we should also be doing. This was something that we struggled with a little bit for this perspective and for this particular paper, right? So this is really an attempt to step beyond just pointing out shortcomings, beyond saying, hey, you're not doing this enough, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. All of these kind of things aren't happening, and instead say, we have some starting points for how to think about maybe going in these directions more productively and more constructively. However, this is really an attempt to formulate something like this. We have attempted to write this as an article, and we haven't so far been successful with getting it published, because it's also for us a step a little bit into new territory. The practical work with that requires a different set of skills, so we were looking forward to advice in terms of, sort of from an academic perspective, publication value, venues, or who would be interested in that, or if this should even be an academic paper. So we are really open for your perspectives on this, your feedback, and yes, so just to position our talk also in this perspective. But the idea is to make something that takes academic, critical perspectives and makes it useful to people who are actually sort of really doing the work and building exhibitions. So much of our critical perspectives have come, in my case, from working at Tekniska and taking apart Game On as an exhibition that has been going there, and also some participation in building and thinking through Play Beyond Play, which is the new exhibition there, and of course Niklas' work in Suomen Pelimuseo, the Finnish Museum of Games. The idea is that we, for this ideation tool, take apart games a little bit, because we want to get some sort of conceptual grasp on them. Of course, we would ideally like to represent sort of the full, the entire complexity that is games. But we are now choosing to take some elements out of that help us make sense of how we can think about the different elements and attributes of the game, but also the needs of the museum and the ways they can be exhibited. That is not going to capture the full spectrum of the light here. There's going to be some things that probably fall between the cracks or that should be pronounced more. And we would be happy to hear from you what you think should be there, but that's the idea. So the ideation tool is taking a look at the goals of the museum with a representation of the particular game, the mode of the presentation for the specific game, and the affordances of the game. As goals, we have so far been using education, entertainment, and preservation. So trying to stay fairly simple on that front, because of course that could be expanded massively. In terms of affordances, we're looking at and trying to make useful this notion of games are different. We cannot all exhibit them in the same way. Some games are hard to play. Some, they just basically have barriers so that people will never get to level 2 if they don't already have the skills to play them. Others require a large community, big multiplayer games. You just can't put World of Warcraft, I mean, you could, and that is happening in Game On, but the World of Warcraft exhibition in Game On is always just like some level 1 character standing somewhere in an empty place. You will never get the idea of what is World of Warcraft, if that is even possible. So what could be things that could be used for that? We have a place that has a game that has a huge community. We could show machinima movies, create levels or maps that make clear what's happening. What happened to games that died, that don't function anymore? What happens to all these sort of complex, difficult to represent, to even show games that are in the sort of homebrew environments? So this is where we talk about the affordances of the game.
Yeah, and we're talking mainly about exhibiting games here, or only about exhibiting games. And I think we need to take a closer look also, or rather first understand that we're not talking about long-term preservation yet, but we could discuss what it means, what are the differences between putting up an exhibition and actually putting something into collections so it can be preserved for the long term. And there's also sort of, we need a better understanding also about the processes, how this happens in different places. So in my experience, in my work experience, I have mostly been working with game heritage sort of from the perspective of first building an exhibition and then putting stuff into collections. But of course, somebody could already have a collection and try to make an exhibition out of that, and that's very much a different process.
Yes, so then the starting point could also be that if we take a look at affordances of games, which are the games that we already have, how could we build an exhibition around those? Or for example, we already fulfill certain goals, which games should we get in that afford us to do something else with them? So this would be the list of our affordances of games that we have so far come up with. you can see that they're separated in object-focused, play-focused, and context-focused. Again, some sort of separation that isn't entirely sort of perfect, because of course there would be much overlap, but you can see that the main part of that is lying in the context area. So we want to sort of push the envelope and push towards us that maybe we should think about games as context, as culture more in the ways we are also exhibiting them. So for example, questions of, is there fan preservation? Do we have rogue archives maybe that make something that are useful? Is there modding happening? Is there subcultures of play, competition, or streaming? What kind of player communities exist? As a way of thinking about a game before making the exhibition around it, to think about what could we do with this. And then, from that step, maybe then going on to looking at what kind of modes of presentation could we choose. An example for a mode of presentation that I think is fairly understandable is the movie. So my example for that is the Unjustice Gods Among Us fighting games. So these are fighting games that happen in the DC universe. Superman is for some reason evil, and now we have to stop him, and we do that by fighting with each other. I don't want to play those games, and I probably wouldn't get through them if I would try to, but I want to see the story. So that means that I'm just watching on YouTube Unjustice, the movie. That is something that the community has already made for me, where they just, whenever the fight starts, cut out, then cut to the end of the fight and show me the cutscene as sort of the in-between story blocks. So now I can just consume the entire story and background of that game without having to play it through. So it allows me already some sort of specific way of experiencing one element of the game that wouldn't normally be available if I would just play it just the way it is. And that happens because, well, there's already a particular modding or player-created environment that happens there. So this is something that we could just, for example, just take a sort of ready-made and say, well, would that work? Then we could take that mode of exhibition and try it out in a game. Use particular levels, maybe just the boss fight. You want to show Dark Souls and how it's hard? Well, let people just play the boss fight. They'll die all the time. They'll get that point. Right? So just something that goes specifically to what you want to say about this particular game, not all of them. They all have particular strengths and weaknesses, and we should play to that. So then, that is sort of the core of what we want to do here. Give particular modes of presentation to people who want to make exhibitions that make them useful for an specific exhibition, and aim from just fits that game. And then we have also, as we mentioned already, been looking at what particular games can do. So here's, for example, an analysis of Pro Pilki. I'm trying to pronounce that correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
The ice fishing game that is exhibited here in the museum. So looking at which modes for this particular game are used and or could be used, which would be interesting. And then we also see that some of them didn't work out because at the affordances level something went wrong, right?
Yeah, this is an interesting example of how we were at the museum working together with game creators as co-curators and sort of working towards exhibiting these games and having a dialogue with these original makers who also, many of them had personal archives of objects and archival material, maybe digital archives, etc. So here you can see how this tool can be made, ideation tool can be used for sort of planning something like this, but also sort of maybe critiquing something, an existing exhibition, and sort of pointing out the strengths and weaknesses, or maybe what is missing from a display, or what could be done.
Exactly, and in a very similar way, and I'm going to go over that now a little bit faster, is here we are using the same tool for looking at Play Beyond Play, which is the exhibition in Stockholm right now, and Tekniska Museet, to see what its strength and what its focus is, and we can see from that it's an exhibition that has a core of originally playable games that are typically focused on entertainment, and then they add some sort of outside layer of education and context. So then we could see that, okay, maybe if we wanted to change something about that, where could we maybe add something, which games would fit, that would afford us to do these kind of things, so that we can include all those other things that are happening outside of that, not just the standard version, and really focus on what is specific about this game that we can use and really develop its full strength and use all its capabilities for its exhibition, which is right now still really something that, from our thinking, is the first steps, and we would be very interested in learning more and hearing your thoughts on this. But yeah,
Yes, and also sort of how we see it is that we can sort of point towards different avenues of displaying games that haven't been used so far. So for example, we could, with the help of the ideation tool, we could think of an exhibition only about memories of play, people talking about how it felt like to play a particular game that we haven't really seen yet in any exhibition. But that could be made, and the ideation tool helps us sort of see these blank areas or potential uses. But also, as we already went through, it also helps us critique existing exhibitions and sort of point at their weaknesses and maybe what could be done. So for us, this is kind of a tool for increased self-awareness of the curatorial choices we make, because they are anyways always ideological choices, but we should be more aware of them, and it also helps us be more reflexive of the work that we're doing when games are becoming heritage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, with the questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Maria?
Okay, can I have a microphone? Yes. Thank you very much. I'm following your work on this tool for some time now, and because you mentioned you can use it for kind of evaluating existing exhibitions, I was thinking that this is actually maybe a good tool set to use in some sort of comparative study of like the past exhibitions. I'm maybe not the greatest fan of sort of taxonomies, but definitely not, I'm into it to a certain level. And I think if you kind of look at what has been done before using this sort of tool, you could see what hasn't been done, so I think that might be interesting. So looking forward for you guys to putting it forward online as a open source kind of tool.
Yeah, thanks so much. And that's exactly what we're aiming for, and I think that's a very, very good thing that could come out of this. Thanks.
Other questions, comments?
Very short one. I wish I would have such a tool at hand when I set up my exhibitions in the last decades. It's a very, very important and probably very useful tool for everybody who wants to set up exhibitions, and exhibitions are an important way to make the society understand the cultural impact of gaming culture in particular, and digital culture more in general, and so it's really worth the work. Across my fears that you will succeed also to get resources and all the other things you need to proceed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe a quick comment here as well about, Maria talked about taxonomy. She's not a fan. I don't think we're sort of big fans either, but it's a way of going further, sort of looking at all the stuff that has been done, that maybe could be done, and maybe starting to fill in the blanks. Okay, this nobody has really proposed, but looking at with the ideation tool, we can see that there's a sort of area that nobody touched upon. So that's sort of, I think it's a process more than a final taxonomy that can help us always in the run.
If nobody else, maybe another thing. Maybe something which you don't have in mind that much. As a curator, game curator, I'm of course aware where the obstacles are to setting up game exhibitions. And there is one area that you have to sell your concept to colleagues. You have to sell your concept to funding partners and other partners. And the more systematic you could set up your concept, the more you can prove that it's really a solid, reasonable idea, and to have that wording at hand and that schemas at hand, which you will elaborate, helps a lot to convince people you have to convince to be able to realize exhibitions with games.
If I can just quick follow up. So basically what I meant is that there's always a risk that this tool will become some sort of, ranking tool, but, it would be better, of course, if it would just map the area. So I think that's the great potential.
Thanks.
I think we had.
Okay.
No, yeah, to answer this would be absolutely interesting, and this curation entire field is something that I think at least we don't have as much overview over as we should have, so this would be, we are absolutely open to maybe talking more about that and learning more about that. Yes, please.
Thanks so much for the talk. I have a question or maybe a suggestion. I was wondering, you were talking about these games that are hard to exhibit, like MMORPGs, for instance, or maybe like League of Legends might be difficult to exhibit because there's a lot of culture around it. And I'm wondering if there could be some precedent in like exhibiting sports, like a museum of soccer or museum of hockey, because there must be something like this, and they might have some kind of methods to, present the culture around the game, not just the game.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really good point. We don't really go to soccer museums to play soccer, but we go to game museums to play games often, and many people think that's the most important thing about them. But these other museums have come up with other tools for exhibiting games and the cultures around games, and I think we should look in making game exhibitions more at what has been done in other types of memory institutions, and all the different ways that we can actually work with history.
Yes, it's a very good point. Thank you so much for the suggestion. The only thing that is sort of the critical thing that is really close for us at heart to think about the curatorial power. What we don't want to do, of course, is like the Museum of Football that is owned by the National Football Association, and in the end this is a PR tool for football, because we're not interested in that. So that is a limitation, and I guess it would be something to take in mind. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, and in this building you can see the Ice Hockey Museum as well, so you can take a look what is the way to present ice hockey in Finland. One more question I could ask. Have you seen similar sort of tools for different kind of exhibitions?
Not really, no. And I think we would need some kind of help in exactly that to sort of help us take the next step with this. So we have a lot of really interesting tables and taxonomies, but to actually make it to a tool that can help people make the exhibitions is sort of not something that we're not at that point maybe yet.
Yes, we've been leaning on some sort of heuristics and some heuristics tables that look at some sort of like good enough but not sort of close to reality way of seeing things. And yes, and also you can very easily rub some people the wrong way, correct, for good reasons, right? This taxonomy, for example, we talk about the aims of museums. We have 3. That's not a correct representation of the aims of museums. We are aware of that, but that's another paper, right?
Okay, thank you very much. So the next speaker will be Maria. And before that, I will ask again, how many of you will be participating in this event program? And Maria can explain a little bit about that, what will happen in the evening. Yeah, but anyhow, how many of you, hands up? 1, 2, who is calculating? Should I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, about 10 people.
Thanks.
Thank you. So Maria will be talking about the museum exhibition that will happen in the wood.